I want to correct the record on a couple of things here that have been said this morning. First of all, I believe that Secretary Tillerson's two predecessors oversaw probably one of the most major withdrawals in foreign policy from the global stage that America has ever seen. And it created a power vacuum that allowed Iran, North Korea, Russia, China to step into that vacuum, and actually during that period of time created a caliphate, physical caliphate that allowed the rise of ISIS in Syria. Such that in January of 2017, Mr. Secretary, I believe that the world was more dangerous than any time in my lifetime. We faced 5 threats across 5 domains: Iran, North Korea, Russia, China, and terrorism across air, land, and sea. And all of a sudden, we woke up and realized that our would-be adversaries have been developing capabilities in cyber and space that the prior administration had not really warned us about. So we woke up, and I think we've all now figured out in the United States, I think there's consensus on both sides, for the last 50 years, with all good intentions, we got China wrong. I think there's a general awakening to that. You have had 3 other cabinet members, along with yourself, make tremendous policy speeches here just in the last month. And I'd like to quote some of that that you wrote about. But you had Secretary O'Brien, our National Security Advisor O'Brien, talk about ideology. FBI Director Wray talk about espionage. Attorney General Barr talk about economics. And you talked about the warning here. I'm going to quote. This is your quote. "We had a very clear purpose in those 4 speeches, a real mission. It was to explain the different facets of America's relationship with China, the massive imbalances in that relationship that have built up over decades, and the Chinese Communist Party's design for hegemony." It's interesting you chose that word because the Chinese love to quote Confucius. And they quote one of his famous sayings is, just as there can't be 2, and they do this recently, just as there can't be 2 suns in the sky, there can't be 2 emperors on the earth. And the word they use for emperor is not benign dictator, which is the most common use of that translation. It's hegemon. They want to be the hegemon that they feel like they were for 4,000 years. You said further, "Our goal was to make clear that the threats to Americans that President Trump's China policy aims to address are clear and our strategy for securing those freedoms established." You went on to say later in there, in closing this out, you said securing, and I think this is the most important sentence in this speech, in my opinion, securing our freedoms from the Chinese Communist Party is the mission of our time, and America is perfectly positioned to lead it because of our founding principles give us that opportunity. Tremendous statement. That will go down in history. The fact that only 6% of China's population belong to the Communist Party, Mr. Secretary, I would argue that our fight's not with the Chinese people, it's with the Communist Party. There's a statement from the administration here dated May 26, 2020. It says, "We do not seek to contain China's development, nor do we wish to disengage from the Chinese people." Can you articulate what the threats the Chinese Communist Party makes or represents to our democracy and our freedoms here, and what are we doing as a Chinese strategy as we try to manage, during your administration here, as we try to manage this turn in our relationship with China, to confront them, to stand up to them, but also to protect our freedoms here at home?
So, Senator, there are multiple fronts to this, and these aren't created by the Department of State. They're created by what the Chinese Communist Party says, to your point. And President Trump recognized that. He talked about it in his campaign back as far as 2015. We've got to get this imbalance corrected. And when we do, there'll be costs associated with that. We've got the largest increase in our military buildup that President Trump has led. We're very focused on an arms control strategic dialogue that we're having today. It was in Vienna on the 27th and 28th of this month, so a few days back. We know we need China to be part of that too. They're now a significant nuclear power. We've seen what's happened on the economic front. We see their Belt and Road Initiative, so they're competing. Senator Rubio talked about their efforts in 4 or 5 technology spheres. This is a multi-front campaign. It will take not only the United States government, but the United States citizens to understand this challenge. And then we've got to build out the global alliance. And last thing I'll say here is, I've seen it said that the United States is asking nations to pick sides between China and the United States. It's fundamentally false. We're asking every sovereign country to pick between freedom and tyranny. And that's the choice every leader's got to make. And that's when I go around the world, that's what I talk to them about. And they all know. They all know that the United States is the country that they want to be alongside. They all know that freedom and our value system and the rule of law and property rights and the protection of these unalienable rights is central to their country. And it's why I think the tide is turning around the world and that people are seeing the Chinese Communist Party for what it is, the threat to the security of their people.
I agree with the tyranny, freedom. I characterize it a little different. There's state control and there's self-determination. The world's turning into a binary equation. Russia, China, Venezuela, Cuba. If you add up all the GDPs of those state-controlled countries, it's probably less than $20 trillion. If you add up the GDP of all the rest of self-determined, that's over $70 trillion, Mr. Secretary. I want to relate that back to the last question here that goes to your comments earlier about the number one thing we do. I think you agreed with it 1,000% with Senator Murphy about allies being the answer here with China. That and this is a huge effort. It's going to take years to develop. But right now we have an opportunity with the Quad, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. This is United States, India, Japan, and Australia. And a great development is happening right now that India is very strongly considering inviting Australia to that exercise, Malabar. Mm-hmm. Would you comment on how important this particular group is in relation to the bigger conversation you just mentioned, the fact that the GDP of the Quad is more than twice that of China today, is not to be lost on the conversation. Would you just make one last comment on that, please?
It's more populous than China as well.
Yes.
These are nations that all have elected leaders, all have democracies, all understand in different cultures, in different settings, all have a central understanding about how commercial enterprise should be conducted and how militaries should engage and about how security is actually achieved. The good news is I think this grouping is stronger than it's ever been. Maybe we were gifted by General Secretary Xi. He took actions that caused each of the leaders in those countries to recognize the value of this group. I meet with them with some frequency, either by phone or in person, and we're working on economic efforts together. We're working on COVID responses together. There's lots of places where we're finding common touch points where we can develop real strength and unity that can, in fact, provide the bulwark that we can build out from all across the world.